working within a hierarchy, functioning without the ability to make decisions in the workplace and society, focusing upon self-interest rather than upon solidarity. These activities produce people on a daily basis. It is the reproduction of the conservatism of everyday life. It's the reproduction of the elements of capitalism. The concept of socialism for the 21st century as an organic system theoretically posits what the experience of the 20th century has demonstrated, which is the need to build all sides of the socialist triangle. One war, three fronts. In the absence of a struggle to subordinate all the elements of the old society, the new society is inevitably infected by the old society. And the matter is worse if we choose homeopathic medicine to cure the infection. In short, rather than build upon defects, such as the orientation toward material self-interest that Marx warned about in the Critique of the Gotha program, and of course Che Guevara warned about, the point is to subordinate those defects. In other words, what I'm suggesting is the socialist triangle, this concept of looking at socialism as an organic system, is a vision. It's a vision of an alternative that we struggle to build. And we need that commitment to building that socialist triangle, that concept of socialism, especially where capital rules the existing government. If we are to turn a crisis in capitalism into a crisis of capitalism, the vision of a socialist alternative is essential to win the battle of democracy. We need to challenge the perception that the requirements of capital are self-evident natural laws, and we need to struggle to build a new common sense based upon the workers' own need for development. But how else can we do that but by putting forward explicitly the vision of a socialist alternative? The concept of the socialist triangle points to the need to struggle against private ownership of the means of production, against hierarchy and despotism in the workplace and community, and against production for private gain rather than social needs. It calls for a war on all three fronts. For this reason, I propose in The Socialist Alternative, the book, a charter for human development, which asserts the right of everyone to the use and benefits of the products of social labor, the right to be able to develop our full potential and capacities through protagonism in the workplace and the society, and the right to do so in communities based on solidarity and cooperation. In the battle of ideas, such a concept articulates precisely what unifies all our separate struggles, which is our own need for development. In the demand for transparency, like putting an end to the secrets of capital and its client governments by opening the books now, in fighting for the rights of workers and communities to stop health and safety hazards, and thereby asserting the superiority of human rights over property rights, in countering capital's demand for commodification of necessary goods and services with our own demand for expanding the commons. These are examples of how we can put forward a vision of a society based upon human development and can begin to build a new historic bloc that will not yield to capital. In the class war, we need to struggle on many fronts, and we need to understand the connections between our struggles. And at no time is this more essential than in this intensified class war when capital is in crisis and the nature of capital comes to the surface. This is the point when it's possible to demonstrate clearly the gap between the logic of capital and the logic of human development. This is a point which provides a unique opportunity to shatter the idea that accepting the demands of capital is common sense and that there is no alternative. Of course, we know that when capital is in crisis, there are always two options: to give in or to move in. When we struggle armed with a clear conception of the socialist alternative, we can build a movement that will put an end to the perversion that is capitalism. But what happens if we don't? What happens, because it's certainly possible that as a result of our ideological disarmament, the current struggles against the capitalist offensive ultimately may lead to a glorious defeat. It's possible, but we must take the chance, and there are many reasons why. In the absence of strong political movements on the left, the response in advanced capitalist countries is one likely not to be analyzed well by political economists like myself, but rather by psychologists. For example, in the United States, where of course it's a matter of faith that this is the greatest country in the world, the reaction to the changing world capitalist economy is a tendency toward protectionism, xenophobia, which is manifested in particular in attacks against Muslims, quick military solutions, racism, and attacks on immigrants who are seen as stealing good jobs. In short, the response is to look for scapegoats, those who are seen as responsible for stealing the birthrights of the true Americans. This is in the United States. And as we can see in Europe, the example of the fascist attacks on the Roma people in Hungary, and here, the growth of the fascist and Nazi movement, we see before us the specter of barbarism. And in the struggle against barbarism, we need to be clear about some things. And one is the old concepts of socialism. The characteristics of socialism of the 20th century will never challenge the mass psychology which prevails in advanced capitalist countries. If there's anything clear in the reaction of masses in developed countries to the initial appearance of the crisis within capitalism, it is that the concept of a big state, of verticalism, of interference by distant entities, not only big government, but also big companies, is precisely what people do not want. For them, that is the enemy. Accordingly, what I'm suggesting is the concept of socialism for the 21st century, with its emphasis upon communal councils, workers' councils, local democracy, is the only way to make inroads on the working class of the advanced capitalist country. The only way to make inroads on the working class of the advanced capitalist countries at this point. What people respond to favorably is the idea of local decision-making and the ability to make the decisions which affect their lives. And they do so precisely because that is the option that has been taken away from them in advanced capitalist countries. Those are precisely the elements that local struggles are precisely elements needed for the battle of ideas in order to struggle against the specter of barbarism. But what happens if we aren't able to stop capitalism? If we aren't able to turn a crisis in capitalism into a crisis of capitalism? I mentioned the idea of capital being able to restructure itself. And we can see that just as the response to the 1930s, the restructuring of capital through the Bretton Woods agreements, we can see a similar attempt underway with the shift from the G7 to the G20. In other words, capital is responding to the crisis by the incorporation of new emerging capitalist powers, such as Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And international capital clearly hopes that through this process of restructuring, in which it brings the new important capitalist actors to the head table for international discussions, it will be able to resume its process of growth in accordance with the logic of capital. However, the very solution to the crisis that capital is introducing, that restructuring that brings the emerging capitalist countries to the Central Committee, that implies the right of these emerging capitalist countries to be full members. In other words, to achieve the levels of consumption and economic development equal to the present levels of the North. And yet we know the world's resources and the Earth itself cannot possibly sustain this. And in this situation of true scarcity, how can capitalism solve this? Remember, capitalism is a system in which all capitals are trying to expand as much as possible. However, it's not a system in which all its members march in unison. And as Lenin explained with respect to World War I, the combination of uneven rates of development and scarcity is a major source of conflict among capitalist countries. In this situation, the new emerging powers want redivision. Redivision of resources, redivision of industrialization, redivision of the right to emit carbon. The struggle is on. It's a struggle over access by capital to scarce resources, energy, water, and food. And clearly, in this world of immense inequality, exclusion, and starvation, we do need redivision if we're ever to achieve the goal of ensuring the overall human development of everyone. We want a world, a socialist world, in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. But capitalist redivision is a process of struggle over the right to exploit. It is a struggle not only among capitals, but against the exploited and the excluded of the world. And could we at all doubt that this struggle will become more intense as the logic of continuing capitalist expansion comes up against the reality of natural limits? We do need to redivide. We need to create a world without capitalism. And as Rosa Luxemburg said, and as Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez constantly remind us, the choice for humanity now is very clear before us. It's socialism or barbarism. Thank you.